Off camera. Welcome, everyone. It is 12:55 Pacific time. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Thanks for joining early. We will get started at the top of the hour. If you want to chat with your colleagues while we wait, please open your chat window. You can click the bottom toolbar at the bottom end of your screen, and the chat icon will launch that chat for you. We do encourage you to chat with your colleagues, say hello. Make sure your chat is set to everyone. As a quick announcement, as indicated in the registration for this gathering, by attending the Zoom webinar, you acknowledge that this session will be recorded and may be used for future UAGC presentations. Welcome, grab a cup of tea, water, your beverage of choice, and our story will begin soon. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As people are still joining us, I'm going to go ahead and get us started because I am showing at the top of the hour. We can go to the next slide, please. Before we begin, as indicated in the registration for this gathering, by attending the Zoom webinar, you acknowledge that this session will be recorded and may be used for future UAGC presentations. Welcome. We know you have many choices when selecting your professional development activities, and there are some amazing opportunities here at the University of Arizona Global Campus and beyond. We are happy that you chose to join us today as the UAGC Department of Education and Liberal Arts proudly presents to you Ed Talks. I'm Dr. Jessie Upshaw, and I'm honored to lead the Professional Development Committee of the Department of Education and Liberal Arts here in the UAGC College of Arts and Sciences. I'll be your host this afternoon. Today, we close out the regular sessions of the 9th annual Ed Talk series. Our 2023 Ed Talk series is entitled Sowing Seeds, which is inspired by the work of UAGC faculty leader, Dr. Newton Miller II. And we are honored to have him here today with us as our featured Ed Talker. This year's series has examined sowing and growing seeds as a metaphor for better understanding the relationship between learner and educator, or seed and sower. Each session has examined principles through this lens to develop the mindset aimed at maximizing potential and promoting growth and achievement for learners in the online higher education environment. I want to formally introduce Dr. Miller to you before we get into our story today. Newton, will you come on camera and say hello as I introduce you?
Hello, everyone. Good to see you today.
Thanks so much for being here. Dr. Newton Miller has been committed to the education arena since 1995, when he converted non-traditionally from the ranks of the engineering field. His research interest lies in educating at potential populations, more specifically, the systemic thinking which promotes equitable access to achievement, effective school cultures, and facilitation of programming and instruction resulting in the educational success of at potential populations. Dr. Miller currently serves as the Director of Education Studies and Educator Preparation Programs at the University of Arizona Global Campus. Some of his contributions to the world of education have been lauded by honors like the Impact Award from the Urban League in 2018, Provost Award for Outstanding Faculty in 2014, and the Excellence in Teaching Award from York College in 2012. Dr. Miller believes educators are meant to facilitate the thinking that changes the world. Thus, his mantra is educate, motivate, and help them grow. And I know you'll hear that through his story today. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Miller. As you listen to Newton's story, you might listen for your call to action to share your practices that promote growth and supporting potential in your classroom and interactions with students and colleagues. Or perhaps you will find a new practice that his story and our discussion sparks for you. Dr. Miller, I'm now going to ask that we remove our videos so we can get started after a few brief reminders. Next slide, please. As a reminder, Ed Talks are fashioned after TED Talks, the ever popular way of sharing personal stories for only 18 minutes of monologue. We do this because we want to hear your stories, and we can best do that by sharing our stories. Our goal here is not necessarily to teach you anything new, as you are already an expert in your field. Our goal is to perhaps motivate you to try something new in your approach to helping students succeed. Our storytelling approach is geared to not take a lot of your time, but rather to simply set the stage for an interactive conversation and perhaps encourage you to encourage your students in some new way. As I mentioned in the beginning of our time today, our series Reflection and Extension is inspired by the principles and work of our speaker today, Dr. Newton Miller II, and his book, Why Some Seeds Don't Grow. At the end of our Ed Talk today, we look forward to hearing your story of what you are doing or will do in your classroom or educational setting. After Dr. Miller's story, we will invite all participants to share your reflection and practices. So with that said, audience members, if you could please hold your comments and chat to the end as we listen to Newton's story. Let's get started. Dr. Miller, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this Ed Talk today. Just up on the screen, we have some questions for you to think about as we move throughout the story. As you're viewing those questions, there's probably some things that don't make sense to you. My hope is that at the end, we can use these as an exit ticket, and they will have made a little bit more sense, and we will all have grown just a little more. So to get started, as far back as I can remember, I never liked writing. In fact, 3 books, several articles, dissertation, and hundreds of one-page teaching tips later, I'm still a work in progress as far as writing is concerned. But if you ask my wife and kids, I'm a work in progress in a whole lot of areas too. But I'm going to keep that out of this talk. See, I had an experience in my college days that made me see writing differently. After giving back my scholarship, which, I went to the dean of the College of Education, of engineering in the Pennsylvania State University. And he said to me, listen, your GPA fell below what was needed to sustain your scholarship from NASA. And after telling me about my promising future and the tons of potential that I seem to not be tapping into, he said, listen, I want to make it clear to you, we're not taking your scholarship from you. You gave it away. So after a short stint in the Marine Corps, I wound up finishing my degree at a historically Black college and university where I needed to take some humanities and literature courses. So being the good soul brother that I am, I signed up for African American literature and a theater course. And I wasn't excited to take either of those courses, but the first day of African American literature, it changed everything. See, I arrived at the class just before the professor, and the course was overcrowded, so I went over to the windowsill so I can have a space to lean on. Well, just then, Dr. Bennett, she walked in the room and firmly shut the door, and she got everyone's attention and started walking slowly to the front of the room, singing a Negro spiritual. It was mesmerizing. I mean, every student in the class was silent. It was all eyes on her. Our mouths were open. We were on the edge of our seats. We were wondering, what's she going to say next? What's she going to do next? She had us all eating out the palm of her hand less than a minute into the first class of the semester. And yes, the math and physics guy was hooked too. The first question she asked, well, it changed my perspective on literary content from that moment to this very day. She simply said, what is literature? While everyone in the class had something to say, she began writing things on the board and cross-checking responses and asking clarifying questions. Man, it was a Socratic frenzy in that classroom that day. As a class, we all came to the conclusion that literature is something that every thinking person will ponder at some point in their life. Now, I know you liberal arts instructors and you folks in the humanities and philosophy, you all have some pushback on that definition. But that definition liberated that room full of African-American students who until then all had some experience where the inference was imposed that our culture, our way of seeing things, it was basically incorrect. She did what Paulo Freire says education is meant to do. She liberated us to believe in ourselves, our thoughts, the things we ponder, the way we interpret and perceive our experiences with the world through music, dance, arts, and spoken word and written text. And later on that week, though, Dr. Bennett, she gave us our first writing assignment. Well, she handed everyone's back except mine, right? So as the class was ending, Dr. Bennett indiscreetly, kind of met my eyes and motioned for me to come up to her desk. And when I got up there, she handed me my paper, but there was no grade on it, just a lot of red marks and comments. And she said to me, I heard you talk before, and I know that you tutor students. You're brilliant. This writing does not match what I know about you. She said, son, we need to move some things around in your life to make you whole. You're not working all your ground to capacity. Well, that was my first exposure to rotating the crops. She went on to say, old Bennett, that's what she called herself. Old Bennett knows that you can do better than this. So I want you to redo this and bring it back to me so I can grade it. Well, I redid it and redid it again, and she finally graded it, and I earned a C+. Well, quite frankly, that was fine for me, but apparently she had talked to my theater teacher, Dr. Bagley, who happened to be Coretta Scott King's sister, and she did the exact same thing. I felt like those two were teaming up on me. Now, in retrospect, I look back and I know they were teaming up on me. They had made up in their mind that they were going to rotate my crops to help me be a better writer. They were making the seed aware of his seeds. Now, in my woe is me state, I told a friend that they were teaming up on me. Well, the young lady interrupted my game by saying that they must be teaming up on me too, because they did a similar thing to me too. If I were you, I'd just listen and do what they say. So that's what I did, and my grades began to change immediately. Now, fast forward some years later on down the road, I became an educator myself, and I was in my own classroom where I was paying forward the services that Dr. Bagley and old Bennett gave to me. So I served, it served me well. I thought it was my reasonable service. And because I did it so well, it wasn't long before I grew into leadership and became a principal of my own building. It was then that I found that what I thought was reasonable service was not the thinking of all teachers. You see, it was common to hear things like, it's the students. They don't care. Their parents don't care. They have too many odds against them. The environment won't let them change. School's not for them. And the one that irked me the most is when teachers from the majority population who may have come from meager beginnings, but didn't face the barriers that underrepresented populations and people of color have no choice but to navigate, when they try to compare themselves and justify their ill-informed and micro-invalidated statements by saying, I've had hard times in my life and figured it out, they need to do the same. As educators, we should know that everyone's struggle is different, and that must be respected. Man, that type of privileged stance of thinking is harmful to all of us. Well, after years of being on the front line, I decided to write a book. And in all honesty, the book was my way of giving all those teachers that ever gave me a hard time a piece of my mind. Except this piece that I was trying to give them was meant to help them, at least to be better at what they were supposed to be doing in the schools. So follow me over here for a moment. I want to tell you about our garden. My wife and I, well, we have a pretty robust garden in our backyard. We plant tomatoes, cucumbers, cabbage, string beans, kale, collards, peppers, strawberries, watermelon, and cantaloupe, you name it. It's a pretty nice one. Well, in the beginning of the season, something got into our yard and ate all the seedlings down to the nub. It was discouraging, to say the least. We came home one day to find out that they had been eaten down to the stem. So we had a decision to make in that moment. Do we even want to have this garden? Now, everything looked dead and destroyed by some outside invader. But because this was not the first year that we've had a garden, we had some experience and understood the possibility of what the harvest could produce. So with that in mind, we decided, you doggone right, we're going to have a garden and it's going to thrive. So I suspected the groundhog was the culprit, but I posted up at the window watching to see, when they would show up. Well, when they appeared, I ran out the back door into the yard and they scattered in 3 different directions. And I gave chase and they all wound up escaping through a single hole that they had dug underneath a section of our fence. Now, although I probably looked pretty crazy to my neighbors chasing groundhogs around that I just knew I couldn't catch, my formative assessment was successful. Now I knew what the culprit was and how they were getting into the yard. So now all I had to do was figure out a way to keep the groundhogs outside the fence so our yard could be a sanctuary, a safe place for the plants in our garden to grow. Now, I was told to dig a trench about 12 inches deep along the inside of the fence and place chicken wire and bricks down into that trench and repack it with dirt, and that would keep the groundhogs out. Now, we had about 60-foot stretch of fence that I needed to groundhog proof, but since we decided that we was going to have that garden and I knew it was going to be hard work, I set out to do a 6-foot piece every day until I got the whole fence reinforced. It took several days and it was hard work, but it was worth it. You know why? Because now we were back in control. We were back in control of our yard, our garden, of the environment that was needed for our seeds to grow and our harvest to thrive. Now, since the groundhogs had eaten all our seedlings down to the stem, we planted more seeds. And guess what? As we took care of those new seeds, they began, being careful that the environment was conducive for their growth. The old plants that the groundhogs had damaged, well, they began to grow too. We had counted them out, though. You see, we thought they were damaged beyond repair, that they were worthless, unproductive, and because of the state that they were in. But what we didn't consider was that the roots were still good. And as long as we were taking care of the soil, making sure that it was aerated, fertilized, and moisturized, that the roots were gathering nourishment from the soil and doing their job, which is to make the plant grow. So what was our lesson from this? That no matter what we think, no matter what judgment we pronounce based on how things look on the surface, something's happening under the ground. Believe it or not, the seedlings are trying to grow. Well, our harvest this year has been amazing. Our freezer is full, both of them. We had more than we could eat, and we still have rows of peppers, kale, and collards that we're not even sure what we're going to do with. You see, the experience that my wife and I had in our garden, it applies to the students that you and I serve. We have to approach our students with authentic care. Now, I'm intentionally shying away from using the phrase culture of care because it's been commercialized and I suspect somewhat dulled here at the university. But if you're familiar with Philip Schleckley's work on student engagement, he has a book that has to be 20 years old. It's called Working on the Work. He outlines the levels of student engagement, and the top level is authentic engagement. So I want to borrow his term and use the same connotation for what I'm calling authentic care. Now, authentic care requires work. It requires sacrifice. It requires an educator who's willing to go the extra mile and take responsibility for protecting, preparing, and nurturing their students until a harvest occurs. Now, it requires an educator that will stay the course even when there are no leaves on the plant, when it looks dismal and barren and weak because the groundhogs of life got into their yard and fed off them when they were still young and had no way to protect themselves. You see, groundhogs will eat everything if you let them, because that's just what they do. You see, the same applies to our students, especially those from at potential arenas. The groundhogs of life are attacking at potential populations when they're young. Way before we see them, social conditioning, family traditions, lack of exposure, fallout from SES community cultures, and systemic connotations are bombarding their space and thoughts, thus impacting the way that they perceive and receive the world from the time they're born, long before they enter any of our classrooms here on the collegiate level. Yet we have the audacity to think that there's a problem when in the 5 or 6 short weeks that we get to walk with them, that an at potential student has trouble adjusting to the print culture in this educational space, which is riddled with unspoken rules that until now were foreign to their world. You see, I had a choice. I had a choice of whether or not to go forward with the garden because I was only dealing with plants. Well, educators, they don't have that option because lives are at stake. You see, if we don't resolve to operate in authentic care and do the extra work to go the extra mile to create an environment where the groundhogs of life cannot eat them, then they will be consumed by the social, cultural, and yes, even systemic groundhogs until they are no more than just simply a statistic or a memory or a shadow of what could have been. Or even worse, they become an item used in some scientific or academic research or article that makes some educator feel like they're doing someone a favor, or that they're so badly needed because, after all, these people can't survive without me. Well, check that. I guess one thing is true, though, or at least I believe it. The world cannot survive without educators. But I'm talking about the kind of educators who will ignore their schedule, ignore their syllabus, and ignore their plans to take the opportunity to invest in and rotate the crops and the lives of the students they serve in order to maximize the possibilities of what those students can produce. You know, like old Bennett and Dr. Bagley did for me. So why is it that some seeds don't grow? Well, there's many reasons. This is not an exact science, so it's almost impossible to lock down a consolidated and explicit list of reasons, but we should be aware that as an educator, there are some reasons that are within our control and some that are not. And one thing is for sure, that is I fail to address the ones that are in my control because they're uncomfortable or inconvenient for me to manage, then the seeds I serve will not grow. And by definition, a true educator, well, they're going to have a hard time living with that. So here's the proclamation that Dr. Newton H. Miller is shouting from the mountaintop. Now, you ready for this one? Because for some of us, this one's going to be hard to swallow. And just so you know, to qualify myself, authors like Jawanza Kunjufu, Luke Woods, Eric Jensen, Susan Bloom, Donna Beagle, Samuel Chan, Miles Monroe, and Christopher Edmond have all said a similar thing to this. You ready? Educators of at-potential students who are not willing to serve them in a capacity that are beyond traditional educational spaces are ineffective to that group of students and have a negative residual effect that James Strong's research has revealed will last up to 4 years. Therefore, these individuals who may be tremendous educators should transition into an educational space that's more traditional and does not require the demands that an at-potential student needs in order to grow. So if you're truly called as an at-potential educator and you haven't just chosen this arena, what you really do is tend the soil. You see, you rotate the crops in the lives of students and make sure that the proper nutrients, sunlight, and moisture is present for the seeds to grow. Now, keeping in mind that specific seeds require specific needs and that those needs are not defined solely by your experiences. In fact, even the planter needs cultivating. There are things that you do not know or understand about your students that you serve. And in order for them to grow, you have to have a growth mindset yourself, because the greatest growth happens together. And in your own personal journey of growth, you're modeling how to make the seeds that you're nurturing aware of the seeds, plural, that they possess. So yes, you are a difference maker, but you're simply a catalyst. You're not the hero. You're not the savior. You're not the chance. You're not the opportunity. You are the introduction to exposure. You're the facilitator of the process. Your words, your patience, your authentic care makes it possible for the roots of your most damaged plants to continue to draw nutrients from the soil in the environments which you educate. See, parents may play a part, and neighbors may play a part, but the community environment may play a part. Societal pressures and overt and subliminal messages play a part, but the educator, the part you play, well, that's intentional. That's consciously competent. It's strategically targeted. It's not easily undone or ignored. Your part permeates the very surface of human beings that you get the opportunity to serve. So what you give, it's the life force. It's the nutrients that enrich the soil of the seeds that enables them to grow in spaces where growth is most unlikely, like a rose from the concrete. You see, my father told me a story about an experience he had with a white foreman at a job when he was 16 years old, where he should have been fired. Now, despite Jim Crow, segregation, and fashionable hatred at that time, that foreman spent 2 years to cross the barrier of social conditions and inconvenience himself for this little black boy who was insignificant in his life. He chose to do something that could and would have gotten him criticism from his peers. He invested 2 minutes in the soil of my father's life by depositing the seed to pursue this thing called education. Now, that 2 minutes changed not only my father's life, it changed his children's life and his children's lives. That 2 minutes that foreman displayed authentic care and simply talked with my father changed the destiny of my whole bloodline forever. So knowing that we possess that kind of influence, how dare we miss an opportunity to rotate the crops and maximize the conditions of the soil to impact the harvest that our seeds produce? How dare we miss an opportunity to work to dig down into the ground of our own instructional practices, philosophies, and belief systems to fill those educational spaces with things that will act as barriers to mend the openings in the fences so we can keep the groundhogs of life out of the educational space, the safe space in the garden that we've created and that we're building for the students we serve. See, we must take off our judgmental hats and stop patting ourselves on the back and if we're doing what is required anyway. Like old Bennett and Dr. Bagley exemplified, authentic care is our reasonable service. We must remind ourselves that we're not the savior. We're not the hero. We're not the opportunity maker. Instead, we are the facilitator that tends to the soil. See, our job is to nurture, protect, and rotate the crops so our seeds can produce their maximum possible harvest. So if you have been called and didn't just simply choose to work with At Potential students, like that white foreman, your 2 minutes matter. They make a huge difference in ways that you cannot even predict. And check this out, even after I did all this talking, we still don't have the answer to why all seeds don't grow. But I do know this: if you truly operate with authentic care, then you'll be one reason why they do. Grow, that is. Well, I'm Dr. Newt, and hopefully you grab some morsel you can take with you to educate yourself, motivate yourself, and help yourself grow. Make it a great day, my friends, because that choice is always yours. Thank you.
Dr. Miller, we are honored to have heard that story directly from the experiences that penned these principles for unlocking that potential of At Potential learners. For those of you here today, as we open up the chat lines to consider your takeaways from today's story, let's frame our discussion. What are you currently doing in your practice to support student success and growth? And what are you inspired to do next? I will read these questions from the screen that Dr. Newton Miller shared with us so we can consider as we reflect on our own practice of sowing seeds and supporting student success. Think of a time when someone rotated the crops or displayed authentic care in your travels. What harvest has that small act translated to in your life today? Think of a missed opportunity to keep the groundhogs of life out of a garden that you were responsible for. What would you do differently? And what about you has evolved so that you can actually act out that different thing? Please start sharing your impression, your ideas, and perhaps your new approach in the chat. Be sure your chat is set to everyone. And we would also love to hear from you. And I already see a few hands raised. To share with us using audio, simply raise your hand using the hand icon at the bottom of your screen. You will then be given the opportunity to unmute your microphone and share your reflection that way. We invite you now to join the conversation and inspire others with your story. And Marie, I see you first. You can go ahead and unmute.
I think she's indicated in the chat that was an accident.
I'm so sorry, Marie. Okay, I'm gonna go on to Debbie.
You know what? My hand raise was an accident too. But Newt, I mean, you never fail to remind us with such honesty what our role is and should be. I love the reminder. I love the just call to action, and that it's not doing anything that is above and beyond or special or anything that we should say, you know, I follow culture of care, so I'm this great educator, so and so. It's what we're supposed to do. It's just at the core. And you've known that ever since I worked for you, and you've known that before we ever incorporated anything like this into Ed Talks or UAGC or Culture of Care. So just thank you for being you. I'm so honored to work with you, Newt. Thank you.
I think the honor's all mine, Debbie Carpenter. Debbie Carpenter. Don't forget that doctor.
And I'm seeing in the chat a lot of inspiration and call to action from the words that were shared today. We would love to hear what your next action steps are. I also see an emphasis on that authentic care that you brought up, Dr. Miller. And I think that distinction really helps to identify the core at which we do as educators, how we operate as educators. So I appreciate everything that you brought to light with that.
All right, great. I don't know if anyone has any questions directly for me, comments.
I see another hand. Oh, no, it popped away. Marie mentions in the chat, it really made her think about residual deterrent or the benefit of what we do. And I think that that's really important. I do see another hand. Sue, I'm going to go ahead and give you permission to talk.
Hi, Dr. Newton, and I have taught for many years. And I really like the part that Dr. Newton mentioned that for those students who may come to us who are not necessarily perfect, but they still have good roots, let's not forget how we can help them. And I think that's a powerful thing. And after all, I know for myself, I'm in teaching because I am always motivated and inspired and want to help those in need. And so, but not just those students who come to us perfectly, but above all, it's to help those who are in need so that we can make the difference. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Newton.
Well, thank you for pulling that out, Sue. I just, if I can piggyback off of what you said, I thank you for even recognizing that a lot of times when students come to us, because we're physical beings, we see what that person is doing. You know, we're what we see, could touch, see, hear, smell, taste. That's what we focus on, and we don't know what's under the ground. You know, we don't know what's on the inside, the motivations, the determinations, the lessons learned. I'm going to call it the capital that they bring with them. And it's easy to I'm going to use the word disrespect that because we don't know it's there, you know, and we're operating in our own culture, if you will, educational culture. So thank you for bringing that up, that you know, we have a responsibility to be aware of the roots of the individual, because that's really where the nourishment is being drawn. It's not the external things they do, it's the things that are happening on the inside, the stuff we cannot see. So that's why it's important for us, I believe, to operate in authentic care, you know, as our reasonable service at all the time, because I don't know who I'm actually impacting. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yes, I appreciate it, because I actually taught at one time inner city urban students at a local community college. And so I totally appreciate what you've just said. And my perspective is I get to know each student, especially when I teach online. It's a little bit harder to get to know each of them, but I try to be prompt and responsive. And I learned that a lot of times they do want to do well, better in life. And there are other circumstances. And if I can help them and be more understanding. Yeah. Thank you.
See, Jesse, can I pull out one of, I think it was, I'm sorry, call you Jesse, Dr. Upshaw.
Jesse, please.
In the chat, Marie Henderson, she said, she talked about the residual detriment. So I don't know if anyone's aware, there's a gentleman by the name of James Strong. He does a lot of research on effective teachers, quality hires, things of that sort. He did some research, and he actually, and this has been known for some time, that ineffective teacher has a residual effect, a negative residual effect that can last for 4 years. So if you think about that, if you have in the college level, say a 4-year stint, and you have an ineffective teacher, there's going to be some spillover for that career of the time, the duration that that student is at that university. It's going to be some spillover in all the things they do. Now, how that spillover is measured, you know, there's a lot of ways, but I'm bringing it out again to bring us back to that center of reasonable service. It's our reasonable, so we have to decide. I kept saying, listen, we decided to have the garden. The moment we decided to have it, that meant all the work that came with it comes with it. It's what we have to do. It's not extra. We don't get a pat on the back for it. We get the harvest at the end. So I thank you for bringing that up, Maria. That's real research, James Strong, and it changed how we did business when I was in K-12 and how I still do it here on the higher level.
Thank you, Newton. We also are seeing in the chat, I wanted to pull out Paige's response here of how powerful this was, not just in the classroom, because she's not in the classroom, how these principles can be applied from the registrar's office, that authentic care on all levels for student-facing professionals. So thank you for sharing that, Paige. It's so important.
That you about to make me get up and run around this room, Paige. Thank you for saying that. Wow. Looks, my day's complete. Now we can shut it down. That is beautiful. Exactly. Exactly. We can't compartmentalize the impact and the effect that we have on the individuals. We get the opportunity to, to serve in this educational arena. So thank you for pulling that out. That is amazing. Kudos to you. Kudos to you.
So many kudos to you, Dr. Miller, in the chat here, and I'm reading through all of the inspiration and the encouragement that you have. So I know Debbie already came online, but I want to highlight one of her other comments here of rotating the crops with our writing center tutors as their way to teach out to a tutor on behalf of to reach out to a tutor on behalf of a student and to ask that tutor to make outreach, schedule an introduction, help with more significant challenges. And her final question is, how can we make that referral process more personal and intimate?
Oh, I don't know if she's asking me, but isn't there a process with the writing center tutors? So I mean, I would start with talking with whoever coordinates those assignments. I know that a lot of work is being done now with Teresa Courick's team around, cultural care. What does that mean? Educational philosophies and things of that sort. That may be a place to start. And you gave me the mic, so I'm just going to say it out loud. Even when I was a principal, I would say this. Sometimes the arena in which you work and the skills you have, they may not match. So if they don't match, then find somewhere where they do. So I mean, I don't know if those are the issues or not the issues, but I would start with conversations with the leadership, whoever schedules the writing tutor assignments and contacts, and explain what it is that you believe should be and why it should be, and how can we meet in the middle to make these things happen, or why are they not happening, because there may be some things we don't know. Even if it's to start with one or two tutors and do a test case, so you can see what kind of responses you get from students and data that is captured from there. But that's where I would begin, because it sounds like a culture change, and culture change always takes some time.
Thanks, Sam. And our chat is winding down, but I wanted to bring to light one more question here from Dr. Olson Stewart, an appreciation of the questions you posed for us, Newt, and how we can continue to ask, how can I do better and where are my gaps? So any comment related to other reflection questions we might want to continue to ask ourselves to do our best to rotate the crops?
I'm not seeing that question.
It's a little further up. How can I do better and where are my gaps? Are things that we can ask ourselves. That she was inspired by your talk. Any other ways to set the stage for us?
Well, with me, it's a daily walk. It's connecting back to your why, because when you're doing an ed talk, there's a lot of things you cut out, so I didn't say this. When it came time for me to reinforce the fence, that was a lot of work. I mean, you're talking about digging down a foot for 60 feet, with the pickaxe and the shovel in the heat. It was a lot of work to have to do, and I didn't necessarily want to do it, so I broke it up into 6-foot pieces so that it was more, manageable to me, but that still didn't make me want to do it. So I had to find my why in this. So try to see a connection in this answering your question. I like to work out. So I like to go to the gym and physically work out. It purges me. It does great things for me. So I use that shoveling and the stooping and the bending and the twisting and the reaching as my workout. I squatted and form and things of that sort, because I like the workout. So that was an internal motivator for me to finish that task, even though that task was undesirable. And I'm saying that I think that at times we have to get back to our why and what is our intrinsic and internal motivator as educators, so we can, do things that are not necessarily always desirable to do. I don't always want to regrade this paper for the third time, or things of that sort. But my why is I want these students to succeed. More than just succeed, I want them to see that this thing called education is a gateway, a tool that they can use to spring forth all the greatness that's in them, because someone did that for me. And because they did that for me, I'm at the age now where some of my early students are adults. They'll run into me and they're doing very well in their lives. And they'll say, remember when you said this? Remember when you did that? And I'll remember the thing, but I had no idea that it was going to produce this kind of harvest. So I'm not giving you any concrete answers, Dr. Olson, Dr. Stewart, because if you read the book, I didn't give you any concrete answers. I talked in principles because the concreteness comes from you. The principle is this: stay connected with your why, find your internal motivators, and keep everything centered in them. If you do that, then you'll never tire. It'll always be exciting. It'll always be rewarding.
And on that perfect note, all good things must come to an end, and our time is coming to an end. So thank you, Dr. Miller. Before I let you go, if you could please go to the next slide. I want to provide everyone an opportunity to download their certificate of participation. You can watch the chat box for a link to that, along with links to our Ed Talks homepage. You can find it in the invitation if you are watching this after today's session. You'll be able to find that. You can go to the next slide for me. We want to acknowledge the work of Dr. Newton Miller for inspiring this series all since March till now. Do consider finding yourself a copy of Why Some Seeds Don't Grow. The link to that is also in the chat. Please come back and see us. Next slide, please. At UAGC's Teaching and Learning Conference for our session, Sowing Seeds, A Student Perspective, on Tuesday, November 7th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. We thank you all for joining us today, and another huge thank you to our author and Ed Talker, Dr. Newton Miller, for sharing with us today to inspire our next steps in supporting our students and each other. On behalf of Department Chair, Assistant Dean, Dr. Denise Maxwell, and UAGC's College of Arts and Sciences, Department of Education and Liberal Arts, we wish you a safe, healthy, and impactful October, and we thank you for joining this season. We will see you at the TLC conference next month, and join us next year for our 10th season of Ed Talks. Thank you, everyone.